Session to start in 30 minutes. See you all then. Session to start in about 25 minutes. Webinar to start in 20 minutes. Hi, this is Dwight. Webinar to start in 15 minutes. Just 10 minutes to go for the webinar to start. See you soon. Webinar starts in just 5 minutes. Hi everyone, just a quick note. We're going to be delaying our start by about 10 minutes. So I'll be back in 10 minutes for the start of the webinar, Social Networks and Social Capital. Talk with you then. Seminar will be starting in about 10 minutes. We have a short delay. Talk with you then. Hi, webinar to start in about 5 minutes. Delay time for our start. See you in about 5. Hi everyone, this is Dwight Jaggard. It's a pleasure to have you here. I'm excited for the seminar that we're going to have today, and always look forward to your feedback or the things you'd like to tell any of us during this time. Our talk today is going to be on social networking and social capital. This is the first, perhaps of this year, perhaps ever, of the alumni events in which we'll be talking about this subject, and which we're trying this webinar as a format. And so I'm looking forward to spending all this time during the next hour or so with you. A couple people that should be thanked. One in particular is Karen. And Karan, thank you so much for setting up everything. Congratulations on being president of the Alumni Association. This is the picture Karen sent to me, and this is perhaps a more recent picture. And we thank you, Karen, for all of your help in getting alumni together and getting some of the logistics straightened as I try my first webinar. So I'm excited to get going. Some of you have been asking how my family is. And on the left is Olive, my granddaughter, and on the right is her brother, Elijah, and we just saw them last weekend. They are having a great time. The most recent addition to the family is my grandson, Joseph, and here he is at about 9 months. And my parents, who we also got to see, ages 95 and 99. So it's been a busy last weekend. We had a break from the university. For questions and feedback, please give your questions for me to answer to Karan. There's his email address, karanbola@yifp.in, or his WhatsApp number. Give him a call. And I would appreciate any feedback that you have. And Karan will be sending out a form for that which has just 3 questions. So I'd be very appreciative if after the webinar you give me those 3 responses. That would really be useful. Well, I'm excited today. We're going to be talking about social networks and social capital. This is a great topic. It's fun. It has a little bit of math, nothing heavy duty. Okay, it has lots of pictures. It depends on network science and psychology and the way people interact, and there are a lot of aspects of it. So this will kind of be a light session, okay? Sort of a light version of some things that I've done at other places, including the University of Pennsylvania. But I think we'll have a great time together as we look at some of the things having to do with social network. I'd like to start off today with a story. And this story is a story of Nicholas and Erica. So there's Nicholas on the left and Erica on the right, and here's how the story goes. Love the one you are with. Nicholas and Erica lived 4 blocks away from each other for 2 years as they were going to Harvard, but they never met. Erica went to Bangladesh so that Nicholas could find her there. In the summer of 1987, Nicholas went to Washington, D.C., where he'd grown up to care for his ailing mother. Nicholas was a medical student who, quote, was not ready for marriage. His high school friend, Nasi, was also home for the summer in D.C., and Nasi's girlfriend, Bemi, who had come to know Nicholas, just returned from a year in rural Bangladesh, doing community development work. Bemi had spent her year abroad with a young American woman with whom she shared a desire to eradicate poverty. One afternoon, while writing a postcard to Nasi, Bemi suddenly turned to her friend Erica and said, "I just thought of the man you're going to marry." That man was Nicholas. Erica, of course, was incredulous. Months later, Erica decided to meet Nicholas in Washington, D.C. when the 4 of them had dinner at Nasi's house. Nasi was immediately smitten. Erica was, quote, not unimpressed. However, that night, Erica woke up her sister to announce that she had, indeed, met the man that she was going to marry. 3 dates later, Nicholas told Erica he was in love. That is how Nicholas came to marry a woman, Erica, who was 3 degrees removed from him all along, but who had practically lived next door, and who had never known him before, but was just perfect for him. A very typical sort of social capital story. It comes to us from the book Connected, and I'll give you a series of references at the end of the webinar. You might enjoy the book. So if you're married or if you are in a relationship, you might think about, how did you first meet? It's interesting that a number of people, in fact a high percentage, are introduced to their partner or spouse by someone they know. And so it is that sort of social capital that you and I receive and use every day that enhances our life and enriches it in many ways. Here's our roadmap for today. You're used to roadmaps from Foundations of Leadership, and we're going to talk first about the role of relationships and how work gets done all over the world. And then we're going to talk about social networks and 6 degrees of separation, the fact that we're all interconnected in a number of ways. We'll talk about the rule of 3s, the 3 degrees of influence that you and I have and also are subject to. And then we'll talk a little bit about diagnosing our own social capital. You'll have some handouts which Karen sent to you earlier, and if you fill those out, we'll talk a little bit about those. And if you haven't, you can always do that after the webinar. And finally, we'll close up and talking a little bit about how to be our own social architect. Well, let's get started. Many cultures require some form of social capital in order to get things done. And that's true in the United States as well as India and all over the world. And what I'd like to do is take a quick look at several of those examples. We think of Brazil. Bureaucracy can kill entrepreneurs, and so it's getting through this bureaucratic maze. That's a great challenge if you're working in Brazil. It's a highly stratified society with class and income level actually labeled levels A through E. And so people talk about marketing to level B. Here's a mobile phone, and we're going to have this plan for level B. Classes are spoken of openly, and this is used in business all the time. But what you need often is the help of key families in Brazil, if you're an outsider, to actually get things moving along. China, huge place. I call it the Texas of the world. In the United States, Texas is our largest state, as you probably know, in the lower 48. And I think of China as being the largest, okay, in landmass and in population at the moment, although that's changing. Organizations there are complex. Non-nationals typically need a national partner, and the whole idea is to cultivate the sense of guanxi. Guanxi means gate and tree, if you look at the Chinese symbols, and guanxi is a sort of opening or gateway or tree to family and business associates. And it's the cultivation of that guanxi which allows work to get done, especially if you're an outsider and you're looking to work in China. South Africa, the dynamics are different. They're an economic powerhouse of Africa. They have a lot of minerals, mining, and natural resources, and this is quite a wealth that they bring to the table. There, though, working across racial and ethnic boundaries requires the building of trust, and is perhaps one of the biggest challenges today after the closing down of apartheid. This is the history that comes afterwards. In India, something which you know very well, soon to be the largest company in population around 2017, the idea is to get government out of the way, something which in fact Modi has promised to work on, and I trust it goes well. This idea of Jaggard building relationships of trust and long-term relationship and the respect for hierarchy are part of the keys in understanding how work gets done in India. And you and I'm sure, have many anecdotes, you much more than me, that we could bring to the table as we think about this. In the U.S., Valdez Krebs says, getting work done in the U.S., social capital is the key to success for 21st century organizations. And we're going to come back to a really interesting study that Valdez Krebs did. And so we'll be seeing his name and this picture a little bit later. We think about social capital, that is the value that's in the relationship and the people that we know and the organizational connections. That's the idea of social capital. There are many of anticipated benefits, and those are shown on the left-hand side of the slide. Things like finding better jobs quickly, closing deals, all the things that trust and long-term relationships bring to the table. But there are a number of less expected advantages from social capital as well. You're more likely to be promoted early. Your promotions will come faster. Your bonuses will be larger. You'll have higher salary. These are just some of the benefits of social capital, and you'll even have improved health and a longer life. So the research on connections and the research on social capital and social networks is very rich indeed. And we're going to explore just sort of the top thin layer so that we get a little bit of an idea about this. In order to go further, we have to have some sense about what are the things that will often block us from seeking to enhance our own social capital. And so I'd like to look at two things which often prevent people or provide roadblocks for you and I when we're thinking about social capital. The first roadblock is the moral argument, and it goes something like this. I don't want to think about adding or dropping people from my network. It's unethical to manage one's network and one's friends. And so the question comes then, is it unethical to manage our own network? And I think the answer is really clear, and that is no. We all add and drop people from our social network. We hire and fire, we marry and divorce, we have children or not, we make new friends or not, we manage conflict, And in fact, the whole idea is not if we should manage our networks, but how to best manage our networks. Our best, most fulfilling relationships often don't, quote, just happen. In fact, there needs to be some effort on the part of both parties to make those relationships work. So in that first idea of I feel uncomfortable, the fact is you and I manage our social networks unconsciously or consciously all the time. I love this quote from Susan Pelton, who uses the analogy of building your own financial portfolio when it comes to social capital. And she says, buy and hold good personal relationships throughout your life and pay close attention to the choices you make. Diversify your relationship portfolio in terms of age, gender, education, and income. We'll come back to this a little bit later when we talk about diagnosing our own networks. Don't be afraid to drop your poor performers. And so Susan's encouraging us to be active and managing our portfolio of interconnections in the same way, perhaps, that we manage our monetary or financial portfolio. The second piece of this, or this comes under the first piece, would I still do this if I took myself out of the equation? And is my interest genuine? So the idea of social capital and managing our networks is not just passing out business cards and collecting them or having more people on our Facebook page. It's the idea of having genuine interest in other people. So we're not talking about the left-hand side of this manipulation. We're talking about ethically building our social capital and our social networks. And that may help to give us a sense of the rightness of managing our own networks when we have that genuine interest. Moving to the second block. The second block to social capital savvy is that people say, I have a personal preference not to interact with others. That is, I tend to be less open with people and don't feel socially comfortable in doing this and making these contacts and making the effort to connect to others. And I think the key to this is to realize that whether you're an E or an I, an extrovert or an introvert, we can all participate in building and enhancing our own social capital and our own networks. So consider building social capital in the same way that you would build on any other personal strength that you and I have as we look at our own organization. If you do not get energized by people, that is, if you're an I, learn at least to be open to the opportunities that appear. It's amazing how many opportunities appear to both of us when we are just simply open to the world that's around us. So that takes us through this idea of relationships and roadblocks and thinking a little bit about social capital in that sense. And what I'd like to do is to talk a little bit about social networks. We'll take a look at some examples of social networks before we get on to this idea of 6 degrees of separation. And there's been a lot of work done in social network theory, all the way from those in sociology to those in network science and engineering and physics. And so we're not going to go into each one of those and all of the depths, but we'll get a sense of some of the things that are going on and why people find networks and social capital to be so exciting. And so let's figure out these social networks. What are they? How can we describe them? And what are some great examples as we move forward? So if we think about a network, it's a collection, an abstraction of real life interactions that contain nodes. Nodes are typically individuals, you and I, and there are connections between those nodes, often called links, and they often will represent business or personal friendships between individuals represented by nodes. So in this simple graph that you see on the right-hand side, we're looking at several individuals, about a dozen of them or so, and we're looking at links. These could be thought of as the friendship connections between the individuals in this network. And so there are a number of networks. We're going to look at just a very small sample of those networks. And the first one is by Joseph Moreno. This is the first social network that I know of which occurred, and it occurred for boys and girls in fourth grade class. So these are youngsters about 9 years old, and here we have a very typical social network for them. On the left-hand side, the triangles represent the boys in the class, and on the right-hand side, the circles represent the girls in the class, and the arcs or links between them are links of friendship. And so if we look at this, there's something which strikes us immediately. And the thing which strikes us immediately, of course, is that we have on the left-hand side boys who interact with boys, and on the right-hand side girls who interact with girls, except for one brave couple in fourth grade in the middle of the graph, which connects the two sides. So in general, these boys and girls have friendships amongst their own gender, but it's almost exclusively to boys having friendships with boys and girls with girls. This is published in Who Shall Survive, the book written in 1934, and perhaps, as I mentioned, is one of the earliest depictions of social networks and how they operate. The thing that's interesting about these social networks is that we don't need to know who the boys are, who the girls are, or even the strengths of their friendships, although we could certainly add in additional information, for example, by having the links be thicker or thinner depending on stronger or weaker friendships. However, just by looking at this structure of the network, we have a sense as to what's going on, and that is birds of a feather flock together. The boys like to interact with boys at this age, and the girls like to interact with girls at this age, and that is what is happening. And so the structure from the network is a really useful thing, and we don't even need often the details of what's happening inside of the network. This idea of birds of a feather flocking together is called homophily, and it's this idea of we seek out people who are like ourselves. Certainly we see that in organizations where organizations hire people like themselves and so have a dominant personality. Perhaps the founder brings in a second in command who's very much like herself, and then she hires others who are like herself, and so on. So we see in organizations this sense of homophily very often. If we take a look at some early transportation networks, we get an idea of how those operate. Here's one for United Airlines of the United States going back to 1940. And what you and I see as we take a look at this is a backbone network which goes from the east to the west coast, and several spurs which go off to the side. So this is basically a backbone which goes east and west. I want to get from, say, New York to Los Angeles or San Francisco in the west, and I have this backbone with spurs. However, this is not a very efficient network. It's fairly robust, but it's not terribly efficient. And so if we want to have an efficient network, we'll use the spoke and hub system, which is now characteristic of United Airlines and airlines all over the world. And if we take a look at this plot, we see on the right-hand side New York City, which has 3 hubs actually merged together, and moving to the left and upward, we see Chicago's O'Hare, and then looking to the far left, we have again San Francisco, and we have Los Angeles. One of the advantages of the spoke and hub network is that you need many fewer planes, and so it's cost effective. It's an efficient way to do business and serve many different areas. One of its downsides is if a hub goes out, then of course the whole network in a sense goes down. And in the United States, this happens when snow comes to O'Hare Airport in Chicago in the center of the country. Here's the network for India, and here we see Delhi and Chennai and Mumbai, Kolkata having those hubs, and then the spokes radiating out from them. This is used for trucking and shipping and many different kinds of networks. The next one that I'd like to take a look at is a network which involves high school friendships. And a lot of work has been done on this, And so we're going to take a look at just one example of a high school, which is shown on the next slide. Here we have a high school where the nodes that are yellow represent Caucasians. The nodes which are green represent African Americans, and the nodes which are pink or red represent Asians or others. And so we take a look at that network, and some things stand out immediately as we take a look at that. And what do you see? Well, we see that if you put a line from 11 o'clock to 5 o'clock, that this would divide up into Caucasians on the lower left and African Americans on the upper right. And so we have, again, that sense of birds of a feather flocking together. We have those who are in much smaller numbers, Asians and others, kind of scattered. People find connections wherever they can find them because there aren't as many people who are, quote, just like them. There's another interesting division if you look at that graph, and we see if we drew a line from 2 o'clock to 8 o'clock, there's also a division within the yellow dots and the green dots, that is within the nodes that represent Caucasians and African Americans. What are those? What is that division which is there? And probably that's a division, once again, between young men and young women in this urban high school setting. So again, just looking at the structure of this without knowing any names, we begin to get a sense of a little bit of the dynamics and this homophily, this idea that birds of a feather often flock together. You and I seek out people who are like ourselves. And so the two rules: if you're friends with people, you are friends typically with people of your own race or ethnicity. And secondly, if you're part of a very small minority, you have to reach out to whomever you can find. And that's the strategy that's being shown here. A second really famous case, which I think is really interesting, is the Karate Club network. It's a karate club, and the network represents that club, which is at an unnamed university. And this slide shows us all the members of the club as well as the leaders. There are 34 of them. And if we look at the nodes around the periphery, these represent students, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and so on, around the periphery, down to the 6 o'clock position, 18, 19, 20, and back up to the 9 o'clock position, and then coming up to 11 o'clock, 33 and 34. Now, there are two leaders in this club, and one of the leaders is Mr. He. He's number 1 node. That's the upper right-hand node, and the writing is in red. That's Mr. He. Mr. He is the instructor. He's the one who actually knows karate, and he's the one who's been employed by this college club to teach karate to the students at this university. And on the upper left-hand side is node number 34, John. John is a student, and he's the president. Now, here's where the conflict comes in this particular example. Mr. He sees himself as being at the heart of this club. He has the knowledge, and he's the one who's the maestro, the guru, the teacher, and he's teaching the students, and really the knowledge resides in him. He's the one who tells them whether they've attained the next level belt. And so you can be awarded, for example, a black belt, and that will come from Mr. He. John thinks of things in a totally different way. John thinks of himself as the student president and leader of this group. Mr. He to him is simply an employee. And so John is thinking, I've employed this person to come in. And because of this difference in sort of leadership outlook, the group kind of splits into two parts. Those who are following John, the president, and those who are following Mr. He, who's the instructor. And if we take a look at this network, how do you think the students will divide between the two? Well, if you kind of eyeball the network, you kind of say, look, the students on the left-hand side seem to have more connections to John, and the students on the right-hand side, say 1 o'clock to 6 o'clock, seem to have more connections to Mr. He the instructor. And what's really interesting is if we redraw this graph, then we get John's group on the left-hand side. This is the same network, just redrawn, showing the two leaders sort of at the center of their cluster, and Mr. He. And if we perform something called cut set analysis, we won't do any of that mathematics here, you would make a cut right here where the dotted line is shown, that vertical dotted line. And what you would do is you would correctly identify all but one student as having their primary interest either with John or their allegiance or with Mr. He. So again, that structure is 97% accurate using a mathematical cut set analysis without knowing anything about the individuals except for these two leaders. It's interesting, the one student, the pink node, that's to the left of the vertical line is someone who very much likes John the president, but he's about to be awarded his black belt. And who awards that? Mr. He. And so there's sort of an ambiguous relationship between that one student and the two who would like to be leaders, John and Mr. He. Again, we find all of this out simply through the structure of the network. Here's one last example, which is a network which has a lot of information which is layered onto it, looking at trade. And so if we take a look at this network, we see a trade picture which looks something like this, and that just represents, in German, the different countries who are there. So these are the nodes. The nodes are simply the countries instead of individuals. And then if we look at the amount of trade that each country does, we can size the node accordingly. So we think of the node size as being the importance to trade, at least from a dollar or financial standpoint. And then we can add to that the sense that there are different regions. There's a region in Asia, there's a region in North America, there's a region in Eastern and Western Europe, which tend to have trading amongst the partners in that region. And then finally, we can add to that all of the links, and we can make the links thicker if there's a lot of trade, or thinner if there's only a weak trade relationship between them. And so immediately, what we see is that the US, for example, and Japan, near the center of this, have huge amounts of trade. Japan, not surprisingly, trades a lot with Asia. And the US is sort of in the center and has trade certainly in North America, but also with Asia and Europe. And then over on the right-hand side, we see that Germany, DEU, represents sort of the major hub in Germany at the time this was made. And of course, that's still true today, as Germany is the powerhouse of Western Europe. So we get a lot of information which comes from this. And again, just looking at the structure of the graph, or we can add information by thickening the nodes or the links to indicate the strengths of those trade relationships and the amount of trade. Well, we're next ready to move on to this idea that you and I are all related in some way. And so we'll look at that 6 degrees of separation, which has been made famous in movies and books and even science, as we'll see. And so let's get an idea of what that 6 degrees of separation looks like. Again, just a reminder to you that if you have questions for me, I would love to answer them at the end of this webinar, and I'll do that online, real time, right here as we're streaming. Please send them to Karen, and he'll take them either via WhatsApp or he'll take them through email. And if you'd like to provide feedback, in fact, I request that you provide me feedback if you're so inclined. You'll send those out to Karen, and he'll send you a list of the 3 magic questions. The first one, how would you rate the seminar on a scale of 1 to 7? Second one, what went well in the seminar? And the third one, what could be improved in the seminar? And with that, we get back to our regularly scheduled program, which is degrees of separation and degrees of influence as we think about it. There was a movie called 6 Degrees of Separation. Not a great movie. but it does talk very explicitly about the concept of small worlds, that you and I are connected through perhaps 5 other people, and so we may have 6 degrees of separation. The 6 degrees of actor Kevin Bacon is an interesting concept that originated in mathematics but was popularized in Kevin Bacon numbers. So if you are Kevin Bacon, your Kevin Bacon number is 0. If you acted in a movie with Kevin Bacon, then your Kevin Bacon number is 1. If you acted in a movie with someone who acted in a movie with Kevin Bacon, your Bacon number is 2, and so on. And so you can go online and find for actors and actresses what their Bacon number is. And the smaller the number, in a sense, the closer you are to Kevin Bacon, at least in terms of acting. This idea originally came from the concept of having an Erdős number. Erdős was an amazing mathematician from Hungary. He was sort of an itinerant traveler. He would come and camp at your house or your apartment if you were a mathematician and solve problems with you. And he was amazingly prolific. He published something like 1,400 papers, and his work was in combinatorics and discrete mathematics in particular. So he was definitely eccentric, and you can Google him and find more about Paul Erdős, but he was very well connected because of his mathematics. And so if you're Erdős, and you and I are not, Erdős has an Erdős number of 0. He is no longer living, and so if you can publish and have an Erdős number of 1, you've published with Erdős, you must have done that sometime in the past. And if you've done work in mathematics and published with a paper with someone who published with Erdős, then of course your Erdős number is 2, and so on. I think my Erdős number is something like 4. Okay, but it gives you a little bit of an idea, and that's really where this concept of numbers comes from. And there's a table which you can find easily online, which gives the Erdős number up to, 5 or 10 of a number of people throughout the world. Of course, if you had Bacon numbers and you have Erdős numbers, then Erdős Bacon numbers cannot be far behind. And my son, who's a mathematician and done work in combinatorics and also appeared in a film, may even have an Erdős Bacon number. But for those who've done mathematics and those who have acted with Kevin Bacon, you can have Erdős Bacon numbers, and you can find those online as well. Let's get then to this idea of 6 degrees of separation. And the idea in a sort of initial state, I'll call it stage 0, was shown by Marconi, or suggested by Marconi. Now, Marconi was a scientist of the early 1900s, and he was interested in radio waves. And so he was the person who transmitted radio waves across the Atlantic Ocean and was the first to do so. And so you might think of him as one of the early sort of radio operators of the world. He was an inventor and had that first transatlantic radio telegraph. He was a Nobel laureate. Okay, so a really bright guy. And his question was, how many radio stations would it take to get messages from one person to another person, no matter where they're located over the world? And he figured that you would probably need something like 6 links. That is, you'd be 6 stages removed in order to do that. But he posed the question, and perhaps the first one to pose such a question. The actual number of 6 comes from Frigyes Karinthy, who is a Hungarian novelist. He wrote a piece of fiction called Chains in 1929, and his characters, that is, these fictional characters, believe that 2 individuals could be connected through at most 5 intermediate individuals, meaning 6 degrees of separation. And this led to a fascinating game, again, in his novel. And he was the one who first suggested that it might just take 5 intermediate individuals, or you were so-called 6 degrees separated. And this was back in 1929. Now, the experiment, the empirical data that comes to us is from that famous psychologist, Milgram. Milgram did his small worlds experiment in 1967. It was ingenious. what he did is he took a number of letters, packets, and he gave them to individuals who were in Omaha, Nebraska, which is in the center of the United States. Okay, not terribly populated and definitely not an urban area. And what he asked those receivers of those letters or packets to do was to mail those packets to other people that they knew on a first name basis who they thought could get it to the designated receiver. Now, the designated receiver was a broker, okay, a stock broker outside of Boston, in suburban Boston. So the idea was if you were given one of these packets in Omaha, Nebraska, you would send it on to maybe someone, I don't know, maybe in Illinois or Ohio, someone closer to Boston, Massachusetts. And they asked them to send it on to someone else so that it could get to this broker. And what he found was that 18 packets found their target, and it took them about 5.9 steps. And here's a picture of what those steps might look like. You start in the left-hand side, which is in the center of the United States, Nebraska, Kansas, and you send it on to someone else who sends it on to someone else, and so on. And you have these 5 intermediaries, with the 6th person being that stockbroker outside of Boston. So this is a famous experiment, and Milgram did this, and he found that for those packets which got through, they required 5 intermediaries, or so-called 6 degrees of separation. The first person was 1 degree away, the second person 2 degrees away, and your target then was 6 degrees. And so here's just a picture of what that looked like. Milgram is shown in the upper right-hand corner. You can see all of the people who started on the left-hand side, sending things to their target on the right-hand side. That was the receptor, B, and the 5 intermediaries. So there then became some empirical evidence through this wonderful experiment of Milgram that in fact we have the 6 degrees of separation. Well, that's perhaps more than you ever wanted to know about 6 degrees of separation, but that was an important experiment. And along comes, in a much more recent time, Duncan Watts. Duncan Watts is a graduate student, and he's doing applied mathematics and mechanical engineering up at Cornell. And he decides that for his thesis, he would like to investigate how swarms and collective networks of people and insects and other things interact. And he had the mathematical background to take a look at the mathematics that was involved. So he became interested in network science and graph theory of all different types, and actually invented wonderful graphs. We'll take a look at a picture of 1 or 2 of those. And when he graduated, he was hired by Columbia University in the Department of Sociology. So here's a guy who's an applied mathematician. He's now in the sociology department looking at social aspects of graphs. He since taken on other jobs, and most recently that I know of is at Microsoft. And what he did was to look at the small worlds phenomena, that is, are there really 6 degrees of separation, by using email. And so his set of people were all over the world, and he used 48,000 senders, 19 targets, in 157 countries back in 2001. And he found that the average route had something like 5.5 intermediaries. Again, that sense of 5.5 degrees of separation as we think about getting from originator to those who are receiving it. So this is pretty interesting, and really gives that sense of 6 degrees of separation some credence through a set of empirical studies, both in the early days and also in more recent times using email. Well, with that, we come to this idea of 3 degrees of separation. And the idea can be stated very simply, and that is, you and I are most likely to be influenced by our friends, that makes sense, but the friends of our friends, and the friends of friends of friends. And so up to 3 degrees away, we have influence, and we tend also to be influenced by them. And so if your friends or friends of your friends, or friends of your friends of your friends are eating well or not, you probably will as well. If those friends have healthy habits, for example, they exercise regularly, then you probably will exercise regularly as well. And so the communication within these networks establishes a set of norms, or what's acceptable in our social network. And those give us the influence. We're both the receivers of that influence and the generators of that influence. And it gives a sense of what our reach is. Our typical influential reach is something like 3 degrees away. Friends of our friends of our friends. So that gives us a little bit of a sense as to what happens when we take a look at who influences who when you think about social networks. Well, this is completely consistent with the concept of social proof and Cialdini's principles of persuasion. And there's a very nice clip which I'd just like to show you called the elevator game. And it gives you a sense of what is that social proof. Social proof is that idea that we influence and persuade others when many other people think in a similar manner. You and I persuaded when all of those around us think in one way, and we'll tend to be persuaded by that as well. So here's a little bit of comic relief, the elevator game.
You're going to see a fellow who fights a little bit to withstand the group pressure now. He'll expresses his comfort in the way he looks and the way he wiggles a little bit, but watch. He's right in the groove now. The elevator hasn't budged, but the door's open a moment later, and this we find. He's very unhappy. You'll see him. He doesn't know whether to go inside and face front or outside and face back. But he's one of the group now. Here's a fella with his hat on in the elevator. First he makes a full turn to the rear and Charlie closes the door. A moment later, we'll open the door. Everybody's changed positions. We'll see if we can use group pressure for some good. Now, in a moment, on Charlie's signal, everybody turns forward. There it is. Notice they take off their hats. And now, do you think we could reverse the procedure? Watch.
Well, there you have it, the elevator game. And of course, you can play your own version of this. If you go to downtown Delhi and simply look up at the sky, you'll find other people looking up at the sky as well. And so there are a lot of interesting ideas about how we influence others and how they, of course, influence us as well. Let's take a look then at a definition for social capital. It comes from Stu Friedman here at the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania. And he defines, and we'll use this as our definition here, he defines the idea of social capital in this way. Social capital is the building and using of networks of support through reciprocity. And we're going to take a look at that sense of reciprocity. It's a key aspect of social capital, and it's a key aspect of most philosophies and religions of the world, and in fact the way that you and I as human beings tend to interact with individuals. For our next section, let's think a little bit about diagnosing our own social capital. And for those of you that got the handouts before we started today's session, you can get those out, and I'll talk a little bit about them. I won't spend too much time on them here, but you might want to discuss them amongst yourselves if you're with a group in either Delhi or the group which is at Sonapat at Ashoka. You might want to have a discussion amongst yourselves about the following functions and calculations and groupings that you yourself made. So the first, again, this comes from my good friend Stu Friedman, is the network of support, the 4 C's. And the idea is here, you just write down the initials of all of those that you go to for comfort, all of those that you go to for clarification, for celebration, for confrontation, and other, in case something didn't get covered here. And so for comfort, these are people that you and I go to when we're feeling a little bit down, who can cheer us up and who can sort of raise our spirits. Clarification, these are the people you and I go to when you want to know, what is the political landscape? How is this organization working? And what should I know about people in the organization and its structure? For celebration, we go to those who say, well, let's party, okay? And so I'll write down initials for those. For confrontation, when we need to have that candid and clear feedback, who do we go to for that? Who do we really trust for that? And so I assume that many of you have already filled that in and done that. And if you haven't, do that after the webinar and then have a discussion about some of the results. And what we do is we take all those individuals and we'll make our own social network. Typically, our cells are put at the center and called ego. And what we'll do is we'll list all the individuals that we have, that is all those initials, and then we'll list how many other people within our network those people know. And we have some quantities which are shown in the slide, network density, and I'll give some examples of that so we have some sense. This is as complicated as the mathematics will get, multiplication and division, okay? So network density, D, we'll talk about, and the effective size of our network. And so if you did this exercise before, down the left-hand side, you have the initials of all the people that you know by, say, a first name basis. And that total will be the number of nodes, the number of people that you have in your social network. So these are people that you know better than just those who are on your network, Facebook as an example. And then for each person whose initial is in a left cell, the cell adjacent to it on the right, you'll put the number of people that they know within your network. That is within the list of people on the left-hand side. So you may know one person, and that person may know 3 other people, and you may know someone else, and they may know 20 other people in your network, and so on. And then on the third column, you'll simply put a check mark by those that you're very close to. These are the people you really, really trust. They're the ones that you could call any time of day or night, and you would assist them, and they would assist you. And then finally, in the right-hand side, for each one of the initials on the left-hand side, you mark, is there anything that you should note about differences? How are they different than you if there's some significant difference? Some people will put marks there if the person is of a different gender, or perhaps of a different ethnicity or race or religion, or someone who's of a different social or economic class. And so these are important indicators of how diverse our network is. And so we'll take a look at that. The formulas for density and redundancy. The redundancy is that sense of people who replicate what other people in your network know. And then look at our effective size, which is the original size reduced by the redundancy. And then what is the maximum connectivity that you can have? And it's S, the number of people in your network, times S minus 1, all divided by 2. And so you'll have a sense of metrics. If we take a look in many groups that I've worked with, here's just a quick sketch that I made last evening about people and their networks. They typically find that the density is somewhere between 20%, 0.2, and 70%, 0.7. Here's a low density example. Ego is what they call the person at the center in sociology. So you are ego, or you are connected to each one of the nodes. We don't show that because we're interested in how your friends are connected. And so here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 friends. And so the total number of people in this particular network is 7. The total number of friends that each person knows is 14. And so if you start at the top with Arav at 12 o'clock, you'll see that he knows 3 people. And then you go around, the next person knows 1 person, next person knows 1 person, Amav knows 3 persons, Advik knows 2 persons, and so on. You add up all of those, and that gives you T. The density for this particular network is T divided by S times S minus 1, and that gives us 0.33 or 33%. So this is what I would call a low density network. If we just look at it, of course, the networks you and I have are much larger and more complex. But we just look at this very simple network, we see that some of the people within our network know each other, but they don't know everyone. They don't know a lot of people. And so this is not a very fully connected kind of network. This is a network in which people know only 1 or 2 others within our own network. We look at the redundancy, and that calculation gives us 2, and therefore our effective network size is 7 minus that redundancy minus 2, which gives us 5. So that sort of non-redundant or new information is represented by the effective size of 5. Now, if we take a look at a similar network that is much more connected, here's a high density network. It again has 7 friends. You're at the center, you know them all. We don't show those links because we're interested in how the friends are connected. And we see that Vivan is connected to 3 people. Sal is connected to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, and so on as we go on. Ishan is connected to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people as well. And so the total number of individuals, of friends, is again 7, but the linkages that are there equal to 30. That's just twice the number of red lines that you see because each line gets counted twice. And if we take a look at the density, T divided by S times S minus 1, then we get 0.71 or 71%. This is what I would call a high density network. Most of the people in your network, if this represents your network, know each other. And so it's highly interconnected, and there are people who have redundant information. That is, what Saul knows, other people in the network may know as well because they're well connected to Saul. And so the size of the effective network is reduced from 7 down to 2.8, that calculation at the very bottom of the screen. But it gives you some idea of what a very dense network looks like and what a less dense network looks like. And when you make a picture for yourself or do your own calculation using the spreadsheet that I just showed, you'll probably get numbers also, which are numbers between, say, 0.2 and 0.7 for density. Your network size may be enormous, and your effective network size may be much larger than these, but it gives you an idea as to how the calculation is done. So if we're thinking about the sort of the so what question, why should I be interested? What is the meaning of these different numbers that you and I just calculated in this example? Well, the density, as we noted, really tells us how much of our network knows other parts of the network. How many of our friends are friends of other people in our network? And what we often find, especially amongst those who are, say, college age, that they have a set of friends who know each other very well, say, at college or university, and then they have a set from home. These are friends that they made in high school and grade school, and that these two groups may not link very well to each other, but that they're well connected inside. And so you get this kind of clumpy nature of networks. That is, you have certain nodes which are very well connected and other nodes which are much more sparse and less connected. Redundancy simply has to do with how many people in your network have similar knowledge to other people in your network. That is, they're connected well to other people in your network, and so they're likely to have similar knowledge. And then what is the size? That's the sort of absolute number of people in your network using some criterion, for example, that you know on a first name basis. And then what is the effective size when you take into account redundancy? Other measures, such as those who are very different than yourself in some way, however you define that. That may be gender, that may be economic, it may be educational background, but that's important because that gives us a sense of diversity of our network. How diverse is our network? Do we all pal around with people who look just like ourselves? Do we flock together like birds of a feather? And so that's the sense of how people might be different in our own network. And as you look at that, you may begin to get some information on things you'd like to change in your network. And so you might say, wow, my network is not very diverse. And so I'd like to enhance the diversity of that. Degrees of separation. It's a small world, and you and I are probably separated from other people in the world, as we learned, by just 5 intermediaries. The networks that you and I have tend to be clumpy. They sort of fold back on themselves, and size doesn't matter so much, that is S, the total number of people, but where are you in the network? And so you might think about what is your degree of connectedness? Are you connected to many of those people? And do you connect 2 different groups of people together, in which case you have a lot of social capital to give to either of those 2 groups? Some of you may be that one person who connects several groups, and those are called linchpins or bridges, but if you're sociology, you call them those who fill structural holes. And so we think about, are you a clumper or a linchpin, or are you sort of a loner? Are you out at the periphery of a network? And so you can get an idea pictorially about what type of thing your network really looks like. Here's an example of a network where Robert is a linchpin. There are sort of 3 clumps of people. There's the main network over on the right-hand side, and then Robert links that network B to networks A and C. In the case of C, he's the only person who can link them, and C has connections amongst itself. So we have weak links, the dashed lines, we have stronger links, the solid lines. We see James is very well connected over on the right-hand side of network B, but he's not necessarily a linchpin. He doesn't connect this group to other groups, at least for the example shown here. So you can get an idea of the role that you might play in your own network. So when we're thinking about social networks, then we'll be using this definition, the one that comes from Stu Friedman, building and using networks of support through reciprocity. And we're going to talk a little bit about reciprocity, and reciprocity being the engine of social networks. So when you think about reciprocity, reciprocity is that idea of you do something for me, not with the idea of getting something back, but over time. I'll be inclined to do something for you. And likewise, when you do something, when I do something for you, you'll likewise over time be inclined in most cultures to do something for me. So it's this sense of reciprocal action, not necessarily at the same time, not necessarily even expecting reciprocal actions, but that sense of reciprocal action, which really is that engine which runs social networks. And if you want to increase your social capital, you can start that reciprocal behavior by being the one to initiate a favor for someone else. That's a great way and a wonderfully ethical way to enhance the social capital that you have and the networks that you're looking at. And so when we take a look at these networks, then we're thinking about reciprocity, this concept which comes up in almost all philosophies in religion, that paradox of getting by giving, not with the idea of getting something back, but with that sort of natural flow that over a period of time, as we give to communities, communities tend to give back to us. not out of obligation, but because they would like to do that. In Judaism, they have different levels of giving, all the way from having the giver be known by those who receive to those in which the giver is completely anonymous, sort of the highest form of giving in this ladder of tzedakah. And so taking ourselves out of the equation and being anonymous, according to that idea, would be the highest form of giving, and it's a way that people give to each other. If we look in Hinduism, Sikhism, Islam, Christianity, Buddhism, they all have this idea of the golden rule. Do unto others as you would like them to do unto you. And so this idea of reciprocity seems to be buried very deeply within religious thought and philosophy, and in fact to us as individuals. If we want to think a little bit about giving, I like this idea, and that is give without remembering and receive without forgetting. That idea of giving anonymously, not keeping score, okay, but then receiving and being grateful for the person who did a favor for you. And I think that captures very much this idea of reciprocity. It's not I give to you and now you owe me one. It's the idea of I give something to the community, and over time the community will give something back to me as well. Well, this brings us down to the last item for today, and I see we're actually coming up on an hour, so we'll be wrapping this up in just a couple minutes and be ready for your questions, and that is how to be your own social architect. Again, questions go to Karen, and he will transmit them to me very shortly. In fact, I'm just checking my email and seeing if any have come in yet, and I don't see any yet, but if you have some, feel very free to get them to Karen. Be your own social architect. The reason I put this image in here is that this is the museum at Bilbao, done by the architect Frank Gehry. Frank Gehry has these wonderful, iconic buildings all over the world. He was probably the master and perhaps the initiator of making buildings with curved surfaces. It's a completely innovative, creative way of putting together buildings. And we have this gorgeous picture here in northern Spain, Bilbao, Spain, of the Gehry architecture. The outside of this museum is at least as interesting, and perhaps more so, than the inside of the museum. If you ever get to Spain, you've got to go to northwest Spain and Bilbao and just get a look at this for yourself. It's a stunning accomplishment, and he has many other of these iconic buildings throughout the world. But this is certainly one of my favorites and one that I commend to you. So that was the inspiration for thinking of that sort of innovative way of being an architect. You and I can be our own social architects and enhance the social capital and the social networks that we have. And so one of the things that we can do is to first diagnose, what does our network look like? And that was what that grid, and you may actually want to map out what your network looks like. You can use an Excel spreadsheet and go to town with all the people that you know well. And you might think about, who are the doorways, who are the linchpins, who are the openers to new areas? In what cases are you a linchpin or a person who links together two of these networks? I make a lot of email introductions myself. It doesn't take me much time, but it's a way that I can contribute to the well-being of others, and it's a way that you can as well. You can think about alignment. How well is your network, that group of friends, aligned with the things that you would like to get accomplished? Do you over-rely on people in your network? That is only one person that you can go to for, say, advice. If so, you might decide that you'd like to enhance that. Is there only one person who's different than yourself, or a couple of people? And if so, you may decide that you'll enhance the kinds of people that you have in your network with respect to diversity. And so getting a sense of what our networks look like makes an awful lot of sense. The law of reciprocity is the very bottom bullet, and that is the give first, knowing the unique value that you bring to a network, and of course over time you will be on the receiving end as well. I want to think a little bit about how to cultivate our networks. I'm not thinking about just spreading our business cards everywhere, but we sort of see those, if you will, professional networkers who do that, and that sort of usually turns everyone off. But we think about who would I have genuine interest in? What could I do for them? And would it be worthwhile for the two of us to meet? And so you can do some what I call trite things. And again, these ideas come from Stu Friedman, from whom I learned a lot about reciprocity as being the engine for social networks. And that is something as simple as writing a thank you note. It's very interesting. In my 35 years of being a professor, I've written hundreds, perhaps thousands of recommendations. And I can think of 2 people who wrote me back an actual handwritten note that they gave to me. And I remember them to this day. And so when you write a thank you note, email is fine and texting is fine, but if you really want to make an impact, there are ways to do that. And so doing those sort of trite things. For those who are at the very periphery of your network, make sure that you're connecting to them maybe just 2 times a year, maybe just an email that you send out, maybe once around the winter holidays and once in the summer, but you make that effort to reach out. There are these different types of networks, and I won't take actually very much time on this. We don't have orderly networks like the ones shown on the left, but you and I tend to have networks like those shown on the right, as I mentioned, where there's sort of clumps of individuals who are well connected, and then they're at the center, and then there are people who are out on the edges. Duncan Watts actually invented what he calls small world networks as ways in which we're well connected, if you look at the network on the left, to those who are adjacent to us and those who are once removed. And then he randomly undoes some of those links and creates the sort of clumpy networks, which represent and are great models for our social networks shown on the right. And you can actually do analysis on that. For those of you that are mathematically inclined, you can take a look at that. I'm actually going to skip through this idea of covert networks. I just want to finish up in talking a little bit about ideal networks and the social science research which supports what ideal networks, social networks, might look like for you and for me. And so if we take a look at networks which are very well connected versus those which are very sparsely connected, a question may come to us, and that is, which kind of network would we envision for ourselves, and which kind of network do we have? And so the research shows that the ideal network to have for promotions, for connections, to get ideas, to find jobs, to find partners and spouses, the ideal kind of network is one which combines that idea of closely connected or highly connected individuals around us. That's our trusted set of friends, the people we go to at any time. And also includes a set of people at our periphery who are not well connected at all. And the value that they bring is that they bring in new knowledge. When we think about our closely connected inner network, if you will, that network has people who have a lot of redundancy. They know the same jobs which are available. They know the same people and introduce you to as other people in that very highly connected network. But those out on the periphery who aren't connected to a bunch of other people in your network often will have new information. So they bring real value even though they're at the sparse outer edges. And that's why it's so important that periodically, once or twice or 3 times a year, we get connected or reconnected back to them as we look at it. So if we look at performance versus constraints, okay, what we'd like to have is to be at that point A where we have a lot of people in that inner network fully connected or knowing each other, and then a number of people at the outer reaches who are sparsely connected. And if we take a look at what a network like that might look like, here's again a sketch that I just made this morning. You're at the center of this network, your ego, and you can see there's a cluster of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, about 8 people who are sort of your trusted partners, if you will. They know each other, they know you, and that's a high performance network for trust getting wise advice. And then you'll note as you move away from that central portion, you have a set of people who aren't well connected at all to others in your network. However, they know people outside of your network, and they're very valuable because when it comes to getting a job, they will know things that you don't know. They'll know people and opportunities that you don't have a way of connecting to, and that's the value that they bring. So it's a wonderful paper on the strength of links, strong links versus weak links, and the weak links play this incredibly important role. Weak links are those people you don't get connected with very often, but if you have a weak connection with them, they know information which is not redundant, which is not the same as the information other people in your networks have. I'm going to skip through the example on business application, and sometime when we're together, perhaps we can look a little bit deeper. I'll just finish up with some social capital fun. Here we go. Number of contacts. How many people do you know on a first name basis and connect several times a year? Less than 100, 1 to 500, 500 to 1,000, 1,000 to 2, or more than 2,000? And the answer is, for most of us, we'll know, I see it's not showing up on your screen, but it's the last one. Most of us will have something in our professional networks, there's something like 3,500 individuals. And so the networks that we have, this is different than our Facebook network. These are people that we know and that we can get connected to. Attraction. What are the two top determinants of chemistry in a professional relationship? 1, intelligence. 2, attractiveness. 3, similarity. 4, frequent contact or proximity. 5, power and status. And the answer is similarity and proximity. Those are the two things which are highly predictive of that sort of chemistry, the people that we interact with often, and that we're, if you will, geographically connected to or geographically close. These all come, by the way, through a wonderful book written by Wayne Baker called Achieving Success Through Social Networks. Finding a job. What percentage of the population find jobs through personal contacts? Less than 10%, 10 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 70, or greater than 70? And the answer is greater than 70. And so it's the value of those people at the periphery of our networks that really help us when we're looking for a new job. And finally, with what percentage do our friends introduce us to our spouses, partners, or friends? Less than 10%, 10 to 30, 30 to 50, 50 to 70, 70 to 90, or greater than 90? And, drum roll, the answer is 50 to 70%. So the majority of our friends are introduced to us through others. Here are the references that I promise you. The first one, Wayne Baker, Achieving Success Through Social Capital, a really wonderful book. Baker is a professor at Business School of Michigan and has a very readable, almost no mathematics. You'll enjoy it. Robert Putman on Bowling Alone, okay, the collapse and revival of American community, talks about some of the problems that come in lack of community. And then finally, the last one, Social Capital. On the second page, Cialdini's Influence, Science, and Practice. Those of you who are students as in YF this year or very recent alums, we've talked about this book and Foundations of Leadership a number of times. 6 Degrees of Science of Connected Age by Duncan Watts, and Connect. These latter two, in fact, all three of them are very non-mathematical, but I think you'll find them and enjoy them. Going on to a little bit heavier duty books, as far as the mathematics goes. The first one, Linked, is a wonderful, very readable, but with some mathematics. And the second one, Networks, which has much more mathematics in it and really talks about the science of networks, and I think will be useful. And then finally, Jackson's Social and Economics Networks. And my last two favorites, which are connected, I mentioned several times the wonderful work that Stu Friedman has done, and this comes from his book, Total Leadership. You might be interested in getting that. And Adam Grant's book, also from the Wharton School, Give and Take. And his is all about the small things, the low-cost things that you and I can do to help others, and what that does for us as well as for them. And so it's great. Well, no Jaggard talk would be good without the $3,000 takeaways. So here are our $3,000 takeaways for today. And let's take a look at these things together. Number one, a social network structure provides great insight into the behavior and interaction of the participants. And so just knowing the structure and knowing very little else can give us great insight. And this is where network science has made many analytic and quantitative contributions. Secondly, we influence and influence others who are our friends, friends of our friends, and friends of our friends of our friends, up to 3 degrees away. And finally, understand that reciprocity is that engine which drives social capital and allows us to enhance social capital and increase it. Number 4, we all have some social capital. It's valuable. It's an asset which is worth protecting and enhancing. And you might think about how, with your personality type and your connections and your diversity, what you'd like to do in that area. And then finally, consider how best to be your own social capital architect. What will you do in the coming week to enhance your social capital? And with that, I have a request for you. And my request for you is that you provide some feedback to Cadden about today's webinar. And I think he sent this out already. If he hasn't, he will send it out very shortly. And if you would give this back to Cadden, he will anonymize your responses and send them to me. So I won't know any individual response, but I'll have a sense. First one, rate the overall presentation of this webinar on a scale of 1 to 7, 7 being high. 2, provide 1 or 2 items that were done well in the webinar. And 3, provide 1 or 2 items that could be improved in the webinar. And that would be great. And with this, we have some time for questions. Here we go. Question number 1. How can one ensure that introduction capital can have mutually beneficial return on invested time? So the idea of introduction capital is great. And I think the idea is to have a genuine interest in the other person. That is, if we were to take ourselves out of that introduction, and so that we got no credit for it, would we still do it? Okay, and that really tells us something about that idea of what's a great return, and are we doing this for the right reason? There are some who make introductions and want to be, in a sense, kept in the loop for all subsequent introductions. In a sense, they want to get credit, okay, for all subsequent introductions. What we're talking about here is genuine interest, where you can truly take yourself out of the interaction. Second question, can we understand the social network with respect to contextual affordances? Can we place this network in a model of cultural transmission? This is talking a little bit about the strength and the type of links that we have. And so when you think about the type of links that we have and the strength of them, this is a little bit different than sort of typical network structure. But just as we saw with economics and trading amongst countries, we can certainly give graphs that we take a look at more than just structural information. We can size the nodes, as an example, or size the links to show stronger or weaker links. And so there are a number of things that you and I can do in order to enhance the information. But typical graphs will not have this. They'll just have nodes and edges. Context is everything. We know that context or culture eats strategy for lunch. And so context is incredibly important and aren't often given in terms of sort of typical network scenarios. But you might want to think, how could I show context or cultural connection in addition to other connections? Question 3, is there a way to bucket social networks based on each stakeholder's utility? Is it ethical to do so? Do different stakeholders in my social capital have different purposes? Let's take the last one. Yes. Different stakeholders have different and multiple purposes. Again, we have that idea of those who are very close to us, that inner circle of our social network, and those are people that we go to, that we really, really trust, We may go to them often. We know many things that they know. They know many things, and many people that we know. They know other people in that close inner network, and they function as a personal board of advisors, those wise people that we go to for advice. In thinking about the ethics of enhancing our own networks, we want to do it again for the right reasons. The reasons where we're genuinely interested in those that are out there. We're not just exchanging business cards so that we can say, check mark, we have another person in our network. Instead, what we're doing is we're looking for people where we can bring them genuine value. Remember, that engine of reciprocity gets started by you and I first, you and me first. So you and I will start this, and we'll start it by doing something first for the other person who's in the network. Dropping a poor performer, a question from one's relationship portfolio. Considering a relationship is often a two-way, how does one do this elegantly? You know, you and I drop people all the time. And we do it in a very simple way. We just don't respond, okay? And we also have people in our own network who no longer write to us, email, text to us, who no longer connect to us. And so I consider this a very sort of natural idea of we don't have to be butchers in our pruning of our networks, but instead this is something which happens naturally. You and I may be connected very strongly for some period of time, and 5 years later, it may be that our paths have diverged and we've taken on other sets of friends. And then there'll be those set of friends who have known us, say, all their lives, or all of our professional life, and people whose wisdom we really value, where we contribute to them and they contribute to us, and we keep those people in our networks for perhaps a lifetime. Let's take a look at some other questions. Karen, thank you for sending these on. I appreciate it. How can one ensure, oops, we did that one already. Let me go on to the email that follows. There's always a tension between being strategic and being genuine and cultivating networks. How can we be both genuine and strategic as we think about networks? That is a great question. And I think the idea is that we can combine those easily. And that is that I may value you in a strategic way because you may be the entree, the doorway to another group of people. And I can also be genuinely interested in what I can do for you and perhaps what you can do for me as well. But I have a genuine interest in the well-being of you. I think that's that key of the ethical piece of this. And when both parts are there, it's in a sense like a perfect marriage. Okay, then we go forward and we can make those connections and it makes sense. The idea of sort of just handing out business cards, of course, doesn't really grow our network. There may be no relationship which is actually there. And so what we're looking for are having deeper relationships in which we actually bring value to others and allow them to bring values to ourselves. How can we make introduction capital most beneficial? We talked about that. Are the cultural influences on network size and architecture? How does social? We covered that question as well. I'm going to go, Karen, to what I see is our last email, and I think actually we've covered everything which is there. So we've actually come then to the end of our webinar for today. Questions and feedback, again, I do appreciate feedback, and you can get that out to Karen, and he will bring all of those things back to me, but anonymously. So, be your own social architect. Think about how you can enhance and improve your network today. Thanks for listening in, and I enjoy any feedback that you have. I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to talk later.